I have finished knitting the right placket in double knit with buttonholes. The last row was knitted on the right side, and the last knit up stitch was knitted together with the last stitch in the placket. I'm now going to knit up stitches along the neck edge. About 2 stitches are knitted up for every 3 stitches or rows. So I knit up 1, 2 stitches and skip 1. 1, 2, skip, and I continue like this along the entire neck edge. On the left side of the neck, 1 more row was knitted in the background color before the first triangle, so I knit up the stitches 1 row further down so the 2 sides match each other. I have knitted up stitches along the entire neck edge and will make a provisional cast on at the left front edge. The cast on will be used for working the collar and later for the left placket. I use smooth leftover yarn for the cast on and cast on 13 stitches using long tail cast on. The work is turned to the wrong side and the cast on is knitted alternately purl and knit. The last stitch is a purl stitch. I break the leftover yarn. The provisional cast on is held in the left hand and the yarn sits at the jacket's front edge, ready to work across the cast on in double knit. The stitches are knitted alternately knit and slipped purlwise with the yarn in front of the work. The last stitch is knitted. On the wrong side, the stitches are alternately slipped purlwise with the yarn in front of the work and knitted. The last stitch is slipped purlwise with the yarn in front. I'm now at the knitted up stitches in the neck edge, which will be the knit stitches on the right side of the double knit collar. I'm then going to knit up stitches for the knit stitches on the inside of the collar. I do this by knitting up a stitch in the edge in front of the next stitch. I pick up the outermost strand and knit it. Then I slip a stitch purlwise with the yarn in front of the work. Again, I knit up a stitch in the neck edge in front of the next stitch, and slip a stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. There is now only one stitch left before the double knit placket. Again, I knit up a stitch in front of the stitch and slip the stitch. And then I finish by knitting up one last stitch before the placket. Then I continue with double knit over the last 13 stitches. Alternately slip purlwise and knit. I can then knit double knit all the way across the collar stitches. 8 rows are knitted before a buttonhole is made on the right side of the collar, which counts as 4 rows on the right side. The 8 rows are now worked, and I will make the next buttonhole. The buttonhole is made in the same way as in the placket, where first you knit across the first 7 stitches, but on the left side you will now knit all the way to the other side of the collar. I've now knitted the collar with 2 buttonholes and then 6 rows of double knit, including the one to close the buttonhole. The collar consists of 2 layers that can be pulled apart. The stitches are bound off with Italian bind off. I measure a yarn end of about 4 times the length of the collar. The yarn is broken and a sewing needle is threaded with the end. I start by preparing the first 2 stitches for binding off by sewing through the first stitch purlwise. And then I sew through the second stitch knitwise by bringing the needle in from behind between the 2 stitches and catching the front leg of the stitch. I'm now ready to bind off the stitches in pairs, knit with knit and purl with purl. I slip off the first knit stitch knitwise and sew through the next knit stitch purlwise. Then I slip off the first purl stitch purlwise and sew through the next purl stitch knitwise. and I repeat first knit stitch off knitwise and sew through the next knit stitch purlwise. First purl stitch off purlwise and sew through the next purl stitch knitwise. You can now see how the binder off is completely invisible. It is important that the binder off stitches maintain the same size as the rest of the stitches for the edge to be neat. You can check the stitch tension along the way by pulling the two sides apart. And adjust the row of stitches from the binder off if it has become too tight or loose. When there are only two stitches left on the needle, the purl stitch is slipped off purlwise and the knit stitch knitwise. The yarn is weaved in on the back. You can choose to let the yarn end rest for sewing in the top button.